Greetings! My name is George Falconer and this is Peniel. I recommend two books. When Heaven is Silent by Ronald Dunn, a book about suffering. And if you want to understand suffering from a biblical point of view, this book is very helpful indeed. Another book written by a doctor, but this is not a medical book. This is the Gospel of Luke. Luke was a witness to Jesus Christ and he interviewed people, gathered together evidence to prove that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and all the things about him. So if you want a short book to read, just part of the Bible, this is the book I would recommend. I'm going to read Esther chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, and Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king. Falling at his feet and weeping, she begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther. That's the second time. My opinion is that just as he extended the scepter to her the first time to spare her life, here again it's extended to spare the lives of the Jews, which she had requested. The king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him, standing in the presence of the king, knowing that her life is spared, and she's requested the lives of her own people. They are to be spared. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favour, and thinks it the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? So it was very personal as well, the destruction of my family and my people. The destruction of my family, of course, would have meant the destruction of Mordecai. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estates to Esther, and they have hanged him on the gallows. Now write another decree in the king's name on behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. Now when Haman had deceived the king and had the orders drafted that the Jews should be destroyed, he had that same ring. And these orders that Haman had come about could not be revoked, but they could be countermanded by another order. Haman, that devious man, knew full well that signet ring had all the power of not being revoked. That's why he would have wanted it. But now it's given to Mordecai, the man he wanted to destroy. And so orders are created by Mordecai to countermand the previous one, which couldn't be revoked, but you could write something else against it. And I think Mordecai was a good strategist. He would have realised I can't just say the previous order is revoked, because that wouldn't stand in court. He needed a strategy that would save the Jews' lives. So at once the royal secretaries were summoned on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. They wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, and also to the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers who rode fast horses, especially bred for the king. The horses must have been really, really hard worked that day. And remember, the signet ring would mean it can't be revoked. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them, and their women and children, and plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all the provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. So he's given permission for the Jews to attack their enemies, to defend themselves, to suppress their enemies, and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on hand on the day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers riding the royal horses raced out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was also issued in the citadel of Susa, meaning the king's immediate area. So this was known throughout the whole kingdom, that the Jews had permission to defend themselves. And indeed there would be people probably who think we need to help the Jews because we have to consider our own lives. So we need to help them. Mordecai left the king's presence wearing the royal garments, blue and white, of large crown of gold and purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration for the Jews. It was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honour. Mordecai is wearing the very sort of robes that Haman wanted. Mordecai has suddenly become elevated from being a nobody to being someone in command. Wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. More feasting and celebrating, more banqueting if you like. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because of the fear of the Jews had seized them. It was meant to be the Jews who feared them, not the other way round. But now, fear of the Jews is what has gripped them, because this edict has gone out. And you know, if I attack the Jews, I don't have the power of the king behind me. Indeed, the king's armies will be against me. God has turned everything round. God has ordered the circumstances so that his people are protected. Sometimes we might lose battles, but you know what? In God's service, the war is already won, and God has won the war. We might have setbacks, but the war is already won in favour of God and his people. And if you're a believer, you're one of God's people. And I said on a number of occasions that Esther was put into a position of prominence, of influence, access to the king, in order that the God's people, the Jews, might be saved. Her cousin Mordecai said to her, "Who knows that you may have come to your position of prominence for such a time as this." And we shouldn't just apply this to Esther. Perhaps you are in a position whereby there's something you have to say or something you have to do that will accomplish God's will, and you're putting it off. Get it done. You need to do it, whatever it is. If it's good, if God has enabled you to do it, if God's put you into a position to do it, you need to do it, whatever it is. We see too that sometimes God appoints strategists. In this case, yes, he had seen to it Esther was in a position whereby she's able to put the petition to the king so that the lives of her people might be spared. However, I think God also has in mind Mordecai, who's a wise man, and it seems to me a good strategist, because the king leaves it up to Mordecai to draft this law that would protect the Jews. Mordecai, his whole life, would have the experience of being a Jew and being in captivity. Remember, he is a captive. He has been put down. He has been taken into exile. That's why he's there. And his cousin is now the queen. And Mordecai has the skill to draft legislation that will work. Drafting legislation's easy. Drafting legislation that will work is a tall order. And he realizes, I need to have the backing of all the forces behind me, and I'll put all of that into the legislation so that the people will not attack us. And if they do, we will have all the resources in order to defend ourselves. And he's written all that into the legislation. God appoints practical people into positions where his will can be carried out. Esther was a practical girl. She learned in the palace how to approach the king, how to set about everything. She used all her training for that. And here we see Mordecai using the things that he has learned as a captive. And here is the irony of it all. When he was told that this edict had gone out to destroy all the Jews, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and went into fasting and praying, mourning. Esther offered him new clothes, which he wouldn't accept. And of course, she sent a servant to find out why he was behaving like this. And that's when she learned the whole truth about what was going on. So there he is. He's got his sackcloth. At the end of this chapter, he's not in sackcloth anymore. He's wearing clothes given to him by the king and the crown. He has gone from sackcloth to riches. And Esther has been given much more than she asked for, not just the lives of her own people, but all the lands and possession of Haman. And who does she appoint to run it? Because she would know what he's like, she'd know about his skill. She appoints Mordecai to run the estate for her. And so he's running the estate, but he's also preparing his own people to defend themselves, using all his skill. Perhaps you've got skill that God is saying, you need to use your skill for my glory. We tend to over-spiritualize things. Sometimes God is saying, yes, it's spiritual, but it's also practical. Get on with it.